All right, let's get some insight into maybe not maybe, definitely the most surprising team in the Big Ten this year, and that's Wisconsin. After everything they went through last year, it feels like it's almost addition by subtraction. And Greg Gard has Wisconsin just being back to what Wisconsin has been for the last couple of decades. Let's talk about Michael Hogan, covers Wisconsin Badgers for 24/7 Sports. You can follow him on Twitter at mhoganreports. So Michael, you fill me in. Is this as surprising of a season in Madison as it is outside of Madison?
Yeah, the general sense within the fan base for the year is everybody was excited because of such a young team, and there was a lot of promising pieces and whatnot. But yeah, I think it's safe to say this is surprising locally as it is nationally. They were picked 10th before the season, in the Big Ten Conference, and here they are, 17-3. Tied for first place with a huge game tomorrow. I guess it was reasonable to maybe expect this team to be a tournament team that would get better as the year went on, and as guys kind of, got comfortable with their new roles, because so many guys, even Johnny Davis, National Player of the Year candidate, he was a reserve last year, and he's not. Now look at him; he's basically, a few weeks ago, after he scored like 37 against Purdue, he was the biggest reason why, this team was where it was. But now you're seeing other guys step up, and they've won, and they've gotten better and improved in the process. So yeah, it's been surprising. Like I said, it would have been reasonable to expect this team to somehow find a way to squeak into the tournament, I guess. But yeah, nobody envisioned this kind of success. But yeah, here we are in the February, and there's a real chance this team can win the conference here. And I think for as inexperienced as they are, I think I'm sure you'll ask me about Brad Davison later on, but I think he's been a big reason for this team's success, and maybe even bigger now with his experience, because he was on that team a couple of years ago that won the conference. So yeah, I guess it's safe to say it's surprising.
So I'm thinking of like players who have surprised me as much as Johnny Davis, like just the year-to-year improvement. And the guy I go back to is another Wisconsin guy, Frank Kaminsky, between his sophomore and junior year. I think Luka Garza between his sophomore and junior year would probably be that too. But Kaminsky made that leap from good role player to great player. How has this Johnny Davis rise happened? Like, how has he improved from role player on a team that kind of needed somebody to step up last year into right now, legitimately, he should be the Big Ten Player of the Year candidate, National Player of the Year candidate. And I cover Kofi Coburn, who's really good and is probably a first-team All-American. Like, Johnny Davis is deserving of it. How has that happened?
Well, I think the one thing that Gard has talked about a couple of times this season, before the season, in the summer, Johnny Davis played for the U19 FIBA team. Jaden Ivey was on that team as well. A lot of great players. Chet Holmgren was on that team as well. I remember watching those games in the summer and just kind of watching them. Davis didn't have any great performances there. He was kind of almost a role player then too. I think he got a couple of starts, but he was kind of in the same situation he was in this past season, when he was just kind of coming off the bench, contributing a couple of points, playing some solid defense, giving them rebounds, energy off the bench. But Gard has talked about that experience being crucial for him and his development, because he was, I guess, making that team. I think there was like 30 some players who tried out for that team, and they cut it down to 12 or 15 or something like that. And I think, and Davis has talked about this as well. Once he made that roster, I think he finally realized, I can be one of the, best players in the Big Ten and in the country. I think that gave him a huge boost in confidence and made him realize that he can do this and he can be a very big name. And that's been something, there's been a lot behind the scenes. Sure, he's improved, he's putting up monster numbers scoring, and I'm sure a lot went into that over the summer. But I think it was just that experience and making that team that's helped him make this massive leap. That's really been the one thing that's consistently been brought up when someone asks Gard or him about, how he's been able to do this. And I guess it's kind of funny because it has surprised Gard a little bit too. I mean, he talked about it yesterday. They launched his National Player of the Year campaign just yesterday, and Gard was asked about it, and he said, nobody nobody envisioned this kind of rocket ship. We all knew he would improve. We all knew he would be better, but not maybe to the level he has been. And I think, that's, again, that was a reasonable expectation. But you could tell, like, right from the get-go of the season that he had a chance to be, special. You look at that Maui Invitational that the Badgers won. And I think that was a moment of the season really early on that I kind of figured, wow, this team has a chance to, surpass expectations. He scored 20 points in all three of those games, but he went off for 30 points against Houston. Incredible performance. I don't think anybody else, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I don't think anybody else scored more than like 10 points in that game, or more than 12. Biggest reason they won that game. And then you see, he scored, he scored at least 14 points in every single game. He scored 14 points a couple weeks ago in a victory, and it was a bad game for him. That's where we are with him this season. Obviously, the performance at Purdue was probably one of the best in program history. Probably one of the best individual performances of the season in college basketball. 37 points. He was scoring from everywhere on the floor. He had 14 rebounds, a couple assists, a couple steals, a couple block shots. He was the first player since Tim Duncan, actually, to lead his team in all 5 of those statistical categories in a road victory over a top 5 team. And then this past weekend, I actually think this past game, this victory against Minnesota, might have been his best, most signature performance of the season, because he wasn't having a great game. He was having a good game, but not an explosive game. But then the last 2 minutes, he scored the last 6 points. He had 3 rebounds. He forced a turnover and single-handedly closed that game out. So he's a guy, that can go off for 30 throughout a whole game, but he's also a guy who can just turn it on right at the end and help Wisconsin, close out games. He's just has the it factor, and that's a sign of a really, really good player when he can take over games no matter what, for the whole 40 minutes or maybe for the last 2. So it's been really fun to watch. Like I said, it's been surprising, I guess, to see this kind of a jump. But here we are, February. I can't think of another player, and everybody can have an argument for a certain guy, but I just can't think of another player who's maybe meant more to his team. I mentioned that other guys have stepped up along the way and improved and have maybe exceeded their own expectations. But early on, he really was the main reason why this Wisconsin team was winning some games.
Yeah, like there can be arguments for other guys. I'm sure Illinois fans be like, "Oh, Kofi does too." He's got an argument, but Johnny Davis, like, I don't think there's an argument against him right now.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to come up with one.
Yeah, and if they win the Big Ten, I think it's pretty easy to that case. So I want to get into Brad Davis, and I want to get into some of those other reasons you talked about why they've been good, but the metrics don't love Wisconsin because the efficiency rates aren't ridiculous, right? Their defense isn't as good as some years. Their offense isn't as good as, say, Purdue's or even Illinois' at this point, but they win all these close games. They won so many close games. They're the opposite of Northwestern in that they win all of these close games. Besides Johnny Davis, who's kind of got, as you were talking about, this Ayo Dosunmu closing ability, what makes them so effective in close games?
Well, Guard talked about it the other day. They're 10-1 in games decided by 6 points or fewer. I don't know if they made a note last game. That might be the most victories in the nation. And that with 6 points or fewer, that's really impressive. And it's more impressive because it's a young team. You expect maybe a team with this many guys with expanded roles to screw up in one of those situations and lose a game, like that, but they haven't. And I think a big reason for that is just guys. Guards talked about it a couple of times, including this past weekend. They just value every possession, and they're very good out of timeouts. That's something I've noticed. I'd love to look back and maybe even ask Guard about this. What makes this team so good out of timeouts? Because there have been situations this year where they've given up some big leads, or they've gone on a couple scoring droughts, and Guards call a timeout, and then boom, they score right away out of that timeout. They did it this past week against Minnesota. Minnesota had closed the gap to, maybe they even tied the game, or they got it within 2 points, and right out of the timeout, Wisconsin goes on a 6-0 run and extends the lead in the last 7 or 8 minutes of that game. So I think it's a team that's obviously had a lot of learning experiences and a team that just values every possession and knows how to slow things down. They're offensive. They're playing at their fastest pace, which still isn't very fast, but it's notable for Wisconsin because they're usually a very slow offensive team. They're playing at their fastest pace, but they understand when they need to slow it down and settle in and get a good shot. It's a team that's playing beyond its years, and I think another big reason for it is they have a freshman point guard, a true freshman point guard, in Chucky Hepburn, who's been he's starting to find maybe a little bit of a more aggressive approach on offense, but he's been so great taking care of the ball. His assist to turnover ratio is very good for a young player. He's another guy who guards talked about a lot, just playing above his years in the Big Ten. That's very hard to do as a point guard because there's so many talented guys. I mean, he's had some tough matchups this year. And then Lauren Bowman off the bench, another freshman point guard. He was actually supposed to be a freshman last year, but he had to deal with a family matter. So he sat out the entire year. This is basically his freshman year. And he's been good off the bench, not putting up great scoring numbers, but playing great defense, taking care of the ball, finding guys like Davison and Stephen Crowl and, Davis. So, yeah, I mean, they just have a lot of guys, sorry, my phone's ringing here, but they just have a lot of guys playing beyond their years. And it's just been impressive to watch. There's been so many moments this year. I think in one of those Maui games, they were up by like 16 at one point. I think it was either Houston or they got up. It was one of the games in between. I think it was St. Mary's. They led by 12 or 16, lost a big lead, then got down, and they never panicked. They've also have 4 comeback victories of double digits. Against Indiana, they got down by 22 in the first half, and then it was 18 at halftime. Came back and won that game. They can win in a lot of ways. They can come back. They can somehow hold on to these leads. I'm sure Guard would like a couple more blowouts, but you're not going to get that in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I'm sure Illinois fans are feeling the same way with their last couple of games. All right. Brad Davison is probably the most disliked player in the Big Ten right now. But I always say that's got to be a badge of honor because it means you bother people because you win, right? And you're good for the most part. So he's the guy you love on your team, you hate on the other team, but he is having his best season. You said play beyond your years. I don't know if he can, but given how old he is, but he's averaging almost 16 points a game right now. As you mentioned, he's had some huge games here recently. What's he meant to this young team, as you've talked about?
Well, he's meant everything. And I asked Guard, I did a story on this a couple of weeks ago, just about how important he's been, not only for the whole season, but especially his expectations have started to get a little bit higher for Wisconsin. He's just been the ultimate leader, as Guard calls him. Every time his name is brought up, it started in the summer when these guys were all kind of coming back to campus and starting to prepare for this season. I think having that kind of guy around has helped other guys understand how every day is important and you can't skip steps. You can't skip workouts. You can't skip, important parts of the process. And I think just those guys being around someone like that who's played and he's about to pass, I think, Josh Gosser for games played, and he'll also pass somebody for games started. So just having a guy who's been in multiple different, almost every single situation imaginable on a basketball court around a young team, it's just been so important. And his production, like you said, has been really good. I mean, he's averaging that career high 16.2 or 3 points per game. His 2-point shooting numbers have drastically improved from last year. He was only shooting like 27% from inside the arc. He's up near 47 or something like that. This year, his 3-point shooting has been very, very valuable for a team that has at times struggled to hit 3-pointers. In their first 5 Big Ten games, they were shooting 24%. Now they're up around 42 or 43%. From long range. That's been a big part of the recent victories. They've been able to hit some threes. Davison recently passed Bronson Koenig for the program all-time lead in 3-pointers, leads the team with 50-something on the year. Everything about that guy has been very important for this team, the leadership, the production. And as I touched on earlier, as this Big Ten title race heats up, he knows what it takes down the stretch to win games and also stay fresh. I mean, it was brought up after the Minnesota game. are you guys tired? Or because these starters are playing pretty much the entire game. This bench hasn't given them, a tremendous amount of production. They're leaning on their starting lineup quite a bit. So with those other 4 starters, they're kind of looking at how he handles every day and how he's handling these expectations and then the stretch run, because it gets exhausting at this time of year. As you've covered this level of basketball longer than I have, and everything about him. He's just the ultimate leader and the most hated player in the Big Ten. He was involved in other questionable, a couple of questions. He's been on Twitter this year for a couple of some hook and holds and some 3-point shooting. He's kicking his leg out against Iowa a couple weeks ago that had the Bohannons. They had Jordan Bohannon and the McCaffreys upset, and
who's the favorite there? Bohannon, McCaffrey, Davison. You're just listening to who's who of the favorites.
Yeah, there was a little bit of a Twitter scuffle after the day after the game about the call, and it really had no impact on the game. But
like I said, Michael, if he's on Illinois or your team, you love him. You love him.
And Wisconsin fans acknowledge that he's the kind of guy that maybe they would hate on another team. But I mean, he's helping this team win. He's been very, very important. And I think maybe fans are appreciating him, more this year than they ever have in the past. And he's played a lot of good basketball here.
Feels like the same way with Trent Frazier here at Illinois, at least in terms of appreciating him more as super senior. Well, it feels like every year, insert big, skilled big man at Wisconsin you never heard of that steps up. Now Tyler Wall we've heard of, we've seen before, but he's taken a big leap. And then Stephen Crowl. Tell us about those two. What do they bring to the Badgers?
Well, Tyler Wall, as you mentioned, has been, a role player for the Badgers. He got a couple starts last year. His defense has always been a big part of his game. He's always been a strong defender, maybe one of the better defenders in the Big Ten, maybe even a little bit underrated. I think people are starting to finally learn of him a little bit more and what he does. But this year, what's caught my eye, especially recently, is his offensive production. Before he missed the Michigan State game after suffering a bit of an ankle injury against Northwestern. But he was averaging like 15 points per game over Wisconsin's 7-game winning streak, 6 or 7 rebounds too. His offensive production has been very impressive. Just the footwork and he's not a great 3-point shooter. He started the season 0 of 17 or 18, but he's starting to maybe feel a little bit more confident from there. He's hit 3 of them in his last couple of games. But what really impresses me about him is just the paint. In the paint, his footwork, and then off the dribble. He's been lethal off the dribble this year. He's quick. He knows how to get to his spots. Another guy who's maybe improved from being around some talented forwards like Micah Potter and such over the last couple years. But he's obviously, like you said, been known. But I think over the last couple of games, the recent stretch of play Wisconsin's had, I mean, maybe you can even argue more important than Davis. And that was kind of felt silly to say in like November or December, but I think you can make an argument that that this team is much more than Johnny Davis now. He's obviously, this very important player and one of the best in the nation, but you have other guys who've really improved throughout the year and who've become just as important. And another guy, like you mentioned, Stephen Crowl. He had some ups and downs early in Big Ten play, especially. He had to go against Trace Jackson Davis and Zach Edey. He kind of struggled in some of those matchups. He wasn't scoring much. He was struggling at times on defense, but lately his confidence, and he's even admitted it. And players sometimes don't like to admit that their confidence was maybe a little broken or maybe a little down, but he's been pretty upfront about his confidence increasing. Recently, he's scoring 9.1 points per game now. He's had some very strong performances. He was good on, he didn't put up many points against Minnesota this past weekend, but he hit a 3-pointer in that game. His rebounding has been strong. And his defense, I think, is what stood out to me. Just going up against some of those guys like Zach Edey and Davis, in the Big Ten. I think he's learned very quickly that he needs to be more physical, and he has. He's also, and Guard talked about it yesterday, he still has a long way to go in the weight room, but he's taken that upon himself, to really understand that that's where he needs to improve and maybe spend a little bit more time. So yeah, I mean, those two guys have been very, very important as Big Ten play has gone on. And I think people, even thinking about next year, Davis, he's going, let's be real. People are maybe even looking, and maybe no one's looking down the road, but I think you can look at next year and say, wow, these two guys have already improved so much. I mean, they're going to be here for at least another year or two. And I think that gives fans maybe a little, even, some optimism there.
Yeah, and Hepburn too could take a big forward. All right, so Wisconsin has gone through a grueling schedule. The first part of Big Ten play, and they took care of it. They split with Ohio State. They beat Indiana at home. They beat Purdue on the road, which biggest win in the Big Ten so far this year. And obviously they beat Iowa at home as well. So they still got some big games coming up, including this one. But if they're able to win this one, all of a sudden they're in the driver's seat with a favorable schedule to end this thing with 2 against Rutgers, 1 against Nebraska, another one against Minnesota, Penn State on the schedule, right? Illinois has its toughest schedule coming up, and it starts with Wisconsin. So obviously two teams at the top, really important game here. But what do you think of this matchup, Mike?
Well, I asked Guard yesterday about how tough it is to simulate Kofi, and he said, well, I have nobody. I have nobody who can mimic that. He joked that he needs to borrow a couple guys from Paul Christ's roster. But I'm a little bit nervous, or I'm not nervous. The fans are a little bit nervous. I'm a little bit concerned about the matchup, down low. Obviously, we've talked about Crowl and his improvements, but this is a really, really difficult task here. You got a 7-foot guy who's, how much does Kofi weigh? I didn't even look.
They always list him at 285, but it feels
285.
Like,
Wow. That's, you see the pictures. I guess it's not that surprising, but yeah, that's going to be what I'm watching. How can they, he's going to get his, but how can they, you're never going to totally shut him down. So that's going to be
what I found interesting is I don't think you're going to shut down Johnny Davis. Like DeMonte Williams is a great defender, and he's probably going to get Johnny Davis. I don't think you're shutting down either of those guys. Though Kofi has struggled in some games against like Arizona and Purdue, they have different kind of big men than Wisconsin. Yeah. So to me, it's who are the supporting cast?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about yesterday. And Guard kind of alluded to it too, and said both teams are he kind of alluded to the fact that how both teams are similar. You got star players, Kofi and Johnny, and then you got two teams with good, solid supporting casts around those two. Can Wisconsin find a way? And recently they have been, kind of firing on all cylinders. Their starting lineup, all of them are now averaging at least 9 points a game. 3 of them are averaging double figures. It's been a very balanced offensive scoring attack recently. Johnny Davis, he had 27 points against Northwestern, but ever since that Purdue game, you've kind of seen this team, have a more balanced offensive attack, and they're all getting theirs. They're all finding ways to score. To me, though, I just sense that maybe Illinois is better off the bench. Yeah. That might be the difference. Against Michigan State a couple weeks ago, Tyler Wall, of course, missed that game. Probably would have been a little bit closer, but Michigan State's bench outscored Wisconsin's 43-7. So obviously the supporting cast, the starting lineup is going to be important, but to me, can they get just a couple points off the bench? Can they get 10 points off the bench? Can those guys come in and play solid defense? And another important guy in this whole mix here is Chris Vogt, the 7-foot reserve center for Wisconsin. He's been important in games, against Purdue and Indiana. He's not giving them much offensively, but that was never going to be the case with him. He's a shot blocker. He's a rebounder. He's a defender. Those are his strengths. Can he come off the bench and maybe help neutralize in a way, Kofi? Can he give them quality minutes? That's going to be important. And then foul trouble. If Crowl and Vogt have both dealt with foul trouble, sometimes in the same game. If that happens, it's going to be a long night for the Badgers. That's going to be crucial for them to have those two guys in there, because then I think Ben Carlson has given the Badgers some good minutes recently, but he's not Tyler Wall. He's not Stephen Crowl. Carter Gilmore isn't giving them much offensively. So it's going to be interesting matchup. I think it's going to come down to, which one of the guys, Hepburn, is it Hepburn, Davis, Crowl, how much can those guys step up and maybe even have a signature performance tomorrow night? And same thing for Illinois. I think it's going to be that type of game, as you said.
Yeah, I think Wisconsin's concern would be Frazier and Curbelo if Curbelo comes back, right? Guarding those guys, I think, could be difficult. I think for Illinois, it's Tyler Wall. I think Tyler Wall is a matchup nightmare. Jacob Grandison is probably going to guard him, giving up size. So I think that's probably the matchup that makes these things so much fun. And this is why February and March in the Big Ten, man, are a lot of fun. So, Mike, thanks for helping us preview this one. Enjoy the game. I'm guessing from Madison, Wisconsin, because we're getting dumped on snow-wise here. But
yeah,
thanks for previewing this.
Not making that trek down in the snow.
Well, stay warm, man, and thanks for the insight.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks.